Germany is a haunted land. This country is famous for its unique, ancient folklore, which features stories of some of the most mysterious, most unusual, and, in some cases, most disturbing entities of which the world has ever heard tell. Thankfully, as strange or disquieting as these legends may be, they are all matters of fiction. Or are they? Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Fire of Learning. This is the Campfire series. In this video, we will be telling some of these tales, examining some of the most frightening and mysterious subjects of German folklore, from spirits and the undead to creatures that could be called cryptids, to entities that are so bizarre that they are difficult to classify, and considering if there could indeed be truth to these stories. Before we begin, we would like to thank Haile Selassie, Blake Stanley, Bouncer, Kate Wellman-Nichols, and Joe Shaw for being our most recent supporters on Patreon. They join these supporters listed here who help to make videos like this possible. Now then, let's get to it. The Vampire. While the modern conception of the creature has been heavily influenced by the inventions of Victorian authors, the origin of the vampire lies in the much older traditions of Eastern Europe. Vampires themselves, however, belong to a much broader family of malicious, parasitic, undead entities described across the continent, which are said to arise under a variety of circumstances in which an individual is barred from passing on into the afterlife. In Germany, as well as other parts of Central Europe, we find a particularly haunting example of this, with a creature that could be said to be a relative of the vampire, or perhaps even a type of vampire, known as a Nachzehrer. The Nachzehrer is sometimes known in English as a shroud eater, but the word is more literally translated as something like after-drainer. It is so named because once a Nachzehrer is born through death, it will seek to feed upon the vital essence or life force of the family and friends it knew in life. Legends differ on how exactly one becomes afflicted with this curse, but often it is held that the Nachzehrer is born out of tragedy. Some say that those who die by accident are at risk of becoming a Nachzehrer. Other legends hold that they rise alongside plague, and that the first victim of a given plague receives the curse. Some say that simple things, such as giving the dead a material possession with which to be buried, or leaving the name of the deceased individual written upon their burial clothing, invites the curse. But most often, it is believed that those whose lives are ended of their own volition are subjected to the curse. Regardless, the transformation occurs when the victim is laid to rest in their grave. It is said that when the Shroud Eater awakens, as this name suggests, it begins to slowly consume its own burial shroud and its own flesh. Traditions again vary at this point, but it seems that it is typically held that as it does so, it drains the life force of its own family and friends. Unlike the vampire, the Nachzehrer does not need to rise from the grave to do this. Rather, it is able to remain within the grave and feed off of its victims remotely. Some stories do hold that it can and does leave, however, and when it does so, it may take the form of a walking corpse or of a pig. While these legends claim that a Nachzehrer will rise to attack their loved ones and create havoc, they do not necessarily do so for the purpose of feeding, as it is again not necessary. The Nachzehrer is sometimes said to visit the local church and ring its bells before claiming its next victim, and that whoever hears these bells is certain to be next. If the Nachzehrer is not stopped, it will eventually kill its victim. Thankfully, the creature can be stopped. To determine if a Shroud Eater is active in the area, the grave of the suspected deceased must be opened and investigated. The Nachzehrer is said to make noise from within the grave from time to time, and therefore, listening quietly for rumbling and chewing noises may reveal its location. In conditions of high stress, however, people were not always so patient. There are historical accounts of cases in which terrified German villagers would unearth grave after grave to examine each corpse for visible signs of unnatural activity. Once unearthed, it is said that a Nachzehrer will be found resting with its left eye open and one of its thumbs held in its other hand. Furthermore, its burial shroud and body will appear to have not merely been decomposed, but gnawed away at. At this point, a rock or spike may be driven into the mouth of the corpse to prevent it from further consumption, though it is safest for the corpse to be beheaded if not cremated. If the corpse squeals during the beheading, or if it appears that its blood was still flowing, it is regarded as proof that it was a Noxerer. While the behavior of the Noxerer is generally believed to be driven by evil forces, some tales suggest that the fact that it targets its own family and friends is motivated perhaps by a corrupted desire to be close to them once more. The first written records discussing what would come to be known as Noxerers date to the 17th and 18th centuries, not by coincidence roughly the same time period in which clear written records to vampires begin to become popular. Although the mythology surrounding this creature doubtlessly predates this period, and the term Noxerer itself did not arise until after this period, in the 19th century specifically. Prior to this, the creatures were called various things, such as the Schmetzende Toda, the Chomping Dead. Historically, in Germany, undead entities in general were often referred to by the term Wiedergänger, or one who walks again, a term we shall see again in this presentation. The Noxerer is one form of Wiedergänger may take. As is discussed in Thomas Bone's book, Vampire, The Origins of a European Myth, it was believed in parts of Germany that women were more susceptible to the curse than men. This was not exclusive, however. In the Chronicle of Breslau, the deacon Nikolaus Pohl wrote of an incident in the 17th century in which plague had killed thousands in the local area. Not long after, there were reports that chomping noises were coming from the grave of a recently deceased shepherd in the village of Grossmokban. The shepherd was unearthed, and his remains were investigated. According to the chronicle, his corpse was found with his burial shroud stained with blood and held tightly in its mouth, as though his jaws were clenching it. The shroud was removed, and the corpse was beheaded and placed in front of the churchyard. Following this, the deaths in the village reportedly stopped. As with vampires, Christian authorities, both Catholic and Protestant, and the ruling elite abhorred the desecration of graves and often outlawed such activities. However, it seems that in periods of great stress or fear, the peasantry in particular would ignore these laws and perform these rituals out of desperation. The governing elite would often look the other way. It should be noted that while we have presented Noxerers at their most distinct, and perhaps most German, the mythology is somewhat complicated and varied from region to region, sometimes mixing with the mythology of other entities, such as poltergeists, the German name for a loud and destructive ghost. In areas where there was crossover between German and Slavic culture, there was likewise crossover between Noxerer and vampire mythology. Historians find reports of Noxerers who rose from the grave and persisted by drinking blood, and vampires who chewed on their burial shrouds, telepathically inflicting harm on those around them. It is difficult to draw a line denoting where the vampire ends and the Noxerer begins, if they are even to be considered separate creatures in the first place. Ultimately, regardless of how they are classified, the reality is that average people once lived in fear of them and resorted to extreme measures to expel them from the earth. Were they right to be afraid? We take for granted how safe travel is today. Historically, longer journeys through more sparsely populated regions were often rife with dangers. Many of these were quite natural, such as bandits and wild animals, though, if legends are to be believed, a traveler may have been lucky if these were all they encountered. Stories of far darker forces lurking throughout the German forests and countryside have been told since before recorded history, with some prepared to vouch that, even in the modern day, we are not truly free from such things. An example of such a thing is a malicious entity known as an Aufhawker. There is not consensus throughout Germany or the other regions to which this legend extends on what exactly an Aufhawker is or how it appears. Most, however, hold that this is because it is a shapeshifter, able to assume many different forms, and that its true form is a kind of amorphous spirit. In Western Germany, the Aufhawker takes the form of a werewolf or a black dog. In the Northeast, it is a kind of ghost. Elsewhere, it may take the form of something like a goblin, a woman, a corpse, or a variety of other animals. Regardless of the form it takes, the threat it poses to travelers is, for the most part, the same throughout the mythology. The word Aufhawker could be translated as something like the one who leaps upon, or more indirectly, backrider. The spirit is said to wait along roads and pathways at night for lone travelers, often near specific points along the road, such as bridges, springs, and cemeteries. As its names suggest, when a traveler passes by, the backriding spirit will emerge and leap onto their victim's back, attaching itself firmly to its victim. Generally, it is said that, once attached, the entity cannot be killed or removed through normal means. Stories differ on what happens after this. In some legends, the Aufhawker then immediately kills its victim. However, much more commonly, the spirit is said to merely stay attached to its victim, becoming heavier and heavier as the victim moves, until, eventually, it kills them through exhaustion. However, in these latter cases, the victim has a chance of survival. Legends provide a variety of different methods that those encumbered by the spirit may use to free themselves. If the traveler is able to make it into their homes or a church, if they survive until dawn, or if they are within earshot of ringing church bells, the spirit will unlatch and leave its victim. In some cases, it is held that the Aufhawker is actually a spirit of the dead, a kind of Wiedergänger, and that when it latches onto its victim, they must carry it to the grave or churchyard in which the body of the spirit was buried. Inversely, according to Carol Rose's book Giants, Monsters, and Dragons, the Aufhawker may take the form of a horse, which encourages travelers to mount it. Once mounted, the traveler will become stuck on the horse, and the spirit will take them upon a violent ride, and then eject them into a body of water. While all, especially lone travelers, have cause to fear the Aufhawker, it is said that it shows preference for those who have done evil, namely criminals. As is discussed in a 2007 paper by Willem de Blacour, the association between Aufhawkers and werewolves is strong in areas like the Rhineland. Indeed, in this region's folklore, the Aufhawker is often simply a werewolf. Such legends hold that these Aufhawkers transform voluntarily by putting on a magic belt, and that if they were caused to bleed, their human form would be revealed. Other sources identify the Aufhawker with vampires, though while there may be legends that allude to this, especially in German, we did not find any examples of the entity draining the life force of its victim. Rather, the emphasis is on the entity slowly exhausting and crushing its victim over time. You may have noticed certain traits that the Aufhawker shares with other creatures we have discussed in the Campfire series, such as the Kelpies of Scotland and the Black Dogs of England. Indeed, these legends are related and belong to a much larger mythology that spans not merely the Germanic world, but much of the continent. We hope that you are enjoying the video so far. If so, we would like to encourage you to consider subscribing to support the channel and keep up with more content like this in the future. Now back to the video. Throughout Germany and Austria, there is a tale of a particularly frightening creature that has kept those familiar with it indoors at night for centuries. It is believed to emerge after the sun sets to hunt for its prey from above. Its horrible cry is said to be an omen of certain misfortune to all who hear it, and for its victims, the first sign that it is already too late. It is known as the Nachtkrab, or in English, the Night Raven. The German Night Raven is typically described as a malevolent, giant, perhaps man-sized raven. Some legends maintain that the entity does not have eyes, and that if one looks into its empty eye sockets, it causes death. Other legends hold that it has holes in its wings, and that those who look at them are cursed to suffer illness. Regardless, avoiding these features will not necessarily save you. The Night Raven is a vicious hunter which targets human beings. For generations, German parents have used the story of the Nachtkrop to deter their children from sneaking out and wandering at night. Though, truth be told, the mythology cautions that remaining indoors is not a guarantee of protection. In some stories, the Night Raven displays a kind of intelligence, and will enter homes to abduct its prey, should it find it necessary to do so. The Night Raven is not unique to Germany. Variations of this legend can be found throughout much of Europe. Sometimes the entity is depicted as a normal-sized but ominous bird, which simply heralds misfortune. However, the Nachtkrop itself remains well known in German folklore. There is not clarity or agreement in Germany about what exactly the Night Raven is or from where it comes. However, its origins are clearly unnatural. Some suggest it is a kind of Wiedergänger. It is said that if a person who committed a grave sin in life and failed to repent is buried where 3 boundaries meet, they will undergo a horrible transformation within their grave and rise again as a Night Raven. The 3 boundaries are relevant in that historically, sinful people would often be buried away from consecrated grounds, specifically near crossroads, perhaps to confuse the dead should they return in one form or another. In some nearby cultures, it is held that if a gravestone is uprooted, a spirit will be released, which will take the form of a Night Raven. Regardless of what the Night Raven is and where it comes from, the Germans warn us that it is not to be disregarded, and that should one venture outside at night, to turn an eye to check the sky occasionally. Throughout this presentation, we have seen and will continue to see that many of the most unusual entities of German folklore began as regular people who were, for one reason or another, denied the rest which comes with death, and whose souls were therefore forced to remain on the earth in an unnatural form. Such is the case as well for our next subject, an entity known as the Feuermann. A Feuermann, meaning a fireman or perhaps flame spirit, is a kind of ghost condemned to remain in the world of the living, unable to pass on into the afterlife because of a sin or curse with which the soul is burdened. There are many other names for the entity across Germany, such as the Glühende Mann, the glowing man, or the Brünnling, the burning one. Each of these names is a reference to its defining characteristic. A flame spirit is described as a fiery, usually humanoid entity. According to the 1933 Handwörterbuch des Deutschen Aberglaubens, the most common depiction seems to be of a skeleton with a fire burning from within it, like a, quote, fire from within a wicker basket, end quote, though this is only one of many depictions. Other examples include a dark figure surrounded by a column of fire, an entity which is invisible apart from its fiery eyes, a fiery rider on a flaming horse, and even merely a regular-looking man carrying a burning object, such as a lantern. The fire of a flame spirit is typically normal in its appearance, but is sometimes said to be blue. The flame spirit will sometimes be headless, and will carry its head in its arms. Its size seems to vary, and indeed, legends hold that it can change its size, becoming significantly smaller and larger than the average person. A flame spirit will not necessarily take a humanoid form, however. It may appear as a kind of amorphous floating light, or even a blazing animal or object. Though its appearance varies considerably, its origins and behavior are somewhat more consistent. As mentioned, a flame spirit arises when a soul is barred from resting because of its actions in life. Murderers, traitors, thieves, and other criminals are all at risk of being condemned to this existence. But there are specific misdeeds which are said to increase the chances of the curse. For example, if one illegally moves a stone marking a boundary or border, the culprit will rise again as a flame spirit after death, and be doomed to haunt the border that they attempted to change. Apart from borders, flame spirits are said to manifest in fields and swamps. There is a legend of a flame spirit who haunts Lake Constance, who is said to appear before fishermen walking on top of the water. They are almost always seen at night, and are most especially apparent on certain holidays and times of year, such as Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost, and the associated periods of Advent and Lent. In spite of its dramatic appearance and nefarious origins, flame spirits are generally believed to be relatively harmless. Rather, they are mysterious, melancholic, aimless souls awaiting the end of their purgatory. Still, most who encounter these strange, luminous figures wandering through the darkness keep their distance and view them from afar. However, there are many tales of interactions with flame spirits. Because the Foyaman is not a vengeful ghost, but a repentant one, many encounters are actually said to be positive or beneficial. For example, if a flame spirit is encountered and called out to, it will show a traveler the way to its destination in exchange for coin or a word of blessing, which is said to reduce the time it must spend atoning. Flame spirits are said to be more likely to assist a woman than a man. Legend says that if a flame spirit agrees to lead a traveler, it is important that they avoid touching it, as it is painful to do so, and avoid speaking to it, and that the traveler should enter the next building that they enter, backwards. Should the traveler fail to reward the flame spirit for its assistance, or if the ghost is otherwise disrespected, it may take revenge. It may lead the traveler in the wrong direction, become an Aufhawker and latch onto their back, or even set the traveler's possessions or home ablaze. The description presented here makes it clear that the Foyaman is connected to the much larger will-o'-the-wisp mythology seen across Europe. However, sometimes, an entity known as the Irrlicht is considered to be the closer German folklore equivalent of the will-o'-the-wisp. According to Ernst Ludwig Rochholz, in his book Naturmythen, Nature Myths, Irrlichts, meaning wandering lights, are often said to be the fiery spirits of the unbaptized. They wander the earth until the priest delivers the baptismal formula over their grave while it is raining. However, these two closely related terms are at times used interchangeably. Morbach, a municipality in the countryside of western Germany, home to forests, hills, medieval ruins, and several small, quiet villages. It is an area that would quite naturally put one at ease, though the tranquility of this region is betrayed by whispers of a great darkness that calls it home, one which the locals have allegedly tried to keep at bay for centuries. At this, they do seem to have been successful, or at least they were. Our story begins in the year 1812. This was the age of Napoleon, and this area was right in the middle of the conflict and instability that had engulfed Europe during his reign. At this time, Napoleon had just been defeated in Russia, and was retreating to France with his army in shambles and the future of the continent uncertain. Legends tell that among Napoleon's retreating army was a German soldier named Thomas Johannes Baptist Schweitzer. As the retreating army passed through Germany, Schweitzer deserted it and joined up with some Russian soldiers who had deserted their army. They formed a gang, intent to pillage the local area while the region suffered in these unstable times. The bandits set off and soon reached the village of Morbach. There, they broke into the home of a farmer and attempted to rob it. When the farmer caught them, they slew him and his family. Before Schweitzer reached the farmer's wife, however, she used her last words to place the curse of lycanthropy onto him, claiming that he would become a wolf every full moon as punishment for these heinous crimes. Schweitzer and his gang brushed off the woman's final utterance, finished their ungodly work, and left. As the days passed, however, the rest of the gang noticed a change gradually come over Schweitzer. He became progressively more savage and violent, to a point that even his fellow bandits could not tolerate. Soon they would abandon him. Schweitzer continued his criminal lifestyle on his own, though it seems at some point he disappeared into the winter, and his curse finally overcame him. Reports of banditry in the area were soon overshadowed by chilling rumors of the presence of a monster active throughout the land, a werewolf. For years, the locals of the area would fear the full moon and the chaos its rise heralded. Indeed, livestock and people would go missing and be found dead on such nights, unmistakably the victims of the creature that prowled the countryside. Eventually, one night, a local farmer's daughter suffered a horrible encounter with the beast. When she told her family of it, the locals of the area came together and vowed to destroy it. They tracked the werewolf, which led them to Schwitzer and his camp in the woods. Schwitzer, in his human form, fled and ran for miles, but the mob pursued him and caught up to him in the town of Wittlich, where he was killed. He was buried not far from the village, near what is today the village of Vennegorat. However, the villagers feared that Schwitzer's death did not expunge the curse, and that the wolf might still rise again on the next full moon regardless. Thus, they constructed a shrine dedicated to the Virgin Mary over the grave, and placed either one or multiple candles around it. It was said that if the candles were not lit on the night of a full moon, the wolf would emerge from the grave and return to haunt the land. According to the legend, this holy power kept the creature within its grave for many years. Time passed, and people lived and died without ever encountering the creature. But though it gradually faded into myth, each generation dutifully remembered to light the candles before every full moon, just as their elders had instructed. About 140 years after these events, the Second World War came to an end. Following this, the American military established a presence in Germany which has persisted to this day. Members of the American Armed Forces were stationed at various places across the country, such as Hahn Air Base, which was constructed in 1951 to serve as a base for the American Air Force, not far from the aforementioned villages. It is claimed that it was at this base, another 30 years later, in 1988, that the legend came to life. One evening in that year, it is said that 3 off-duty American military personnel were exploring the area, and came across a shrine dedicated to the Virgin Mary, with a candle by it that they either found unlit or put out themselves. Unaware of the legend, or at least its gravity, they thought nothing of it and moved on. However, according to an article published by the Fortean Times, later that night, one of the base's fence line security sensors was triggered. Base security was sent out to investigate. While approaching the site, one of the officers noticed a figure moving in the darkness. Believing it to be an intruder, he shined his flashlight on it. The crew were surprised to find that the figure was instead some sort of large animal, though they could not discern what kind. But then, the creature turned to face them, and to their utter shock, revealed itself to be a great, monstrous wolf. The beast stared the men in the eyes, snarled, and then rose to stand on its hind legs. It then jumped over the nearby fence with a single leap, and ran off into the night. The officers quickly alerted the rest of the base of an intruder. Tracking dogs were brought to the scene as the men intended to pursue the figure. However, the dogs began to panic and refuse the orders of their masters, disrupting the effort. Nothing more was found that night. However, it seems that this was only one story of many that would emerge on the base in the 1980s and 90s of a wolfman lurking throughout the area at night, occasionally in and around the base itself. It is said that strange sounds would be heard at night outside the base, mutilated animal carcasses would be found on the edge of the base, and occasional encounters with a wolf-like intruder who managed to evade security with its supernatural physical abilities continued. Those stationed here began to refer to the creature as Momo, short for the Morbach monster, and while the tale was used to frighten newcomers, there were many here who believed in it, and, as we have just shown, claimed to have seen it, or at least its handiwork. It was author and University of Pittsburgh professor D.L. Ashleman who brought the tales of the Morbach monster, specifically this initial story, to public attention in the 1990s. He claimed that in 1997 and 98, he was emailed accounts of this story by some of those present. Their accounts were republished on his website, though the witnesses remain anonymous. In 2008, German anthropologist Matthias Burgard published the book Das Monster von Morbach, in which he discussed his extensive research into the legend and its origins. Because American servicemen were much more familiar with the story than the locals, he believed it to have been a folktale invented by Americans stationed in Germany rather than an authentic piece of German folklore. Indeed, while werewolves were certainly present and even prominent in German folklore, as we have already partly seen, there do not appear to be any references to this legend specifically which predate the airbase, nor any record of Thomas Johannes Baptist Schwitzer. This would explain the significance of the full moon in the story. The full moon did not have nearly as much significance in the original European werewolf mythology. The idea that it triggers the transformation is an American cinematic invention. Although, admittedly, some versions do claim that the creature rose every night and not just on the full moon. There is also, so far as we could tell, no other evidence that these events took place apart from the accounts of the witnesses. What about the shrine under which the wolf is, or it would seem, was buried? There are many shrines dedicated to the Virgin Mary in the area. We could not identify the one specifically associated with this story. Indeed, it seems that no one is completely confident which shrine is the subject of the story, if that information was ever specified in the first place. Many of them have candles which are periodically lit, but none of them are known to be lit every full moon specifically, let alone every night. But then, perhaps the fact that the legend has been forgotten is the reason why, according to those stationed at Han Air Base, the wolf lives again. The Alps. Long have these towering mountains been the source of mystery and legend. The inhabitants of this region, which includes the German state of Bavaria, have long warned of a strange, fearsome creature that dwells in these mountains. Not only is this entity one of the most famous in German folklore, it may be one of the most unusual we have talked about in this series thus far. The creature is known by many names, but the Germans often refer to it as the Tatzelwurm. While descriptions vary considerably, generally, the Tatzelwurm, or Tatzelworm, is described as a creature with a lizard-like body, and often, though not always, the head of a cat. The beast is typically said to be anywhere from 2 to 7 feet in length, though even greater sizes have been reported. It is said to have gray-black or brown skin, a forked tongue, a stubby tail, boar-like bristles along its back, and short legs and feet. Indeed, the name Tatzelworm means serpent with paws. The number of feet varies from 0 to 2 to 4 to many, like a centipede. According to the 1948 book The Lungfish, the Dodo, and the Unicorn, an excursion into romantic zoology, in spite of its short legs, the Tatzelworm is said to be capable of enormous jumps. Some claim the creature is aggressive and attacks those it encounters traveling in the mountains. Because it is believed to be extremely venomous, with its breath alone enough to kill, a Tatzelworm attack is regarded as highly dangerous. Tatzelworms are said to live in caves and rock crevices, and appear most especially during periods of changing or humid and hot weather. Some also suggest the creature is semi-aquatic. Stories of dragons and dragon-like entities in the Alps and throughout Germany date back to at least the Middle Ages, though they are very likely older. The first reports of a kind of reptilian feline chimera in the mountains specifically date to the 17th century at the latest. It is then that drawings and tales of encounters with such beasts began to become more frequent. While this may seem like the stuff of medieval fiction, in the 18th and 19th centuries, some scholars began to argue that the Tatzelworm could be of legitimate scientific interest. They suspected the beast could be an undiscovered species of lizard or snake, or at least that the legends could have been inspired by the memory of a now extinct animal that was like this. The cat head feature was generally disregarded by 19th century scholars, suggested to have been a fictional or misidentified feature. Thus, the Tatzelworm passed from the realm of folklore into cryptozoology. German, Austrian, and Swiss naturalists in particular remained fascinated by the idea that the creature was a real, undiscovered species of reptile inhabiting the Alps well into the 20th century. Their interest was kindled by the numerous reports of encounters with giant, poisonous lizards in the mountains that were made throughout this time. In 1934, a Swiss photographer, who is known only as Balkan, claimed that one day in that year, while hiking in the Swiss Alps photographing the scenery, he spotted a rotting tree trunk that stuck out to him. He paused to photograph it, when suddenly, the object began to move, revealing itself to in fact be a great lizard. The beast prepared to attack Balkan, and so he retreated immediately. He escaped unharmed, and when he returned, he discovered that he had managed to capture whatever it was that he had encountered in this photograph. Believing the animal to be the famous Tatzelworm, he sent the picture to a German magazine called the Berliner Illustrierte. The publisher of the magazine was fascinated and attempted to organize a search for the creature, though it seems little came of this. To date, Balkan's mysterious photograph remains the only known evidence of the existence of anything like giant lizards in the Alps. Unfortunately, however, the quality of the photograph is too poor to be of much use. Indeed, we cannot even be completely certain that the subject of the photograph is an animal. It's worth pointing out that this was a time when there was great public interest in cryptozoology in general. Hoax photographs of fantastic creatures were very common. For example, this was the same year as the famous surgeon photograph, a hoax meant to convince the public of the existence of the Loch Ness Monster, and only a few years after the Deloy's ape photograph was published, likely a similar hoax, both of which we have talked about in past videos. This is not to say that it's guilty by association, only that the incentive was there. While very large lizards do exist, and while some of them, like Komodo dragons, are venomous, there is no compelling evidence of the existence of anything like this in the Alps, today or in recent history. Some scientists have suggested that if people truly are seeing something, animals like otters may be to blame. In spite of this, curiosity about the creature, and even reports of sightings in the area, continue into the modern day, with some of the most recent alleged sightings reported in northern Italy in 2009. Are these merely tall tales, or is there something potentially dangerous waiting to be discovered in the Alps after all? Historically, her presence was feared by all throughout Germany. Her cry, even more so. For the cry of the Klagefrau heralds doom and destruction. The Klagefrau, also called the Klagemumme or Klagemutter, is a female spirit in German folklore who manifests in areas in which a death or another disastrous event is to take place in the near future, and wails to warn those who hear the cry of the approach of this tragedy. The name Klagefrau, in fact, translates to wailing woman. In this sense, the Klagefrau is the German equivalent of the Irish banshee. However, there are important differences in the mythology surrounding the two spirits. The description of the Klagefrau varies across the region. She is often said to be invisible, but when she is described, it is often as a pale woman in a black dress or burial robe. She may wear a tricorn and/or a white scarf, and have spider webs covering her face. Some say her eyes glow, others that her eye sockets are hollow. Her size also varies considerably. Some describe her as a small but normal-sized woman. Others say that she is a giant figure who may rise high into the sky. The Klagefrau, however, is widely regarded as a shapeshifter and may more often be encountered in various animal forms, such as a long-haired black dog, a gray cat wearing a scarf, a three-legged sheep, a calf with glowing red eyes, or, often, an owl. Indeed, her cries are sometimes likened to the calls of an owl. The origins of this spirit are likewise uncertain and varied. Some say she is the spirit of a deceased woman, specifically a mother who lost her son tragically. Some say that there are more than one, and that a procession of Klagefrauen carrying a coffin may be witnessed in some places. Regardless of her appearance and origins, the Klagefrau's presence is widely agreed to be for the same reason. She will manifest in an area typically around midnight. The air will cool dramatically. An unnatural, deeply disquieting feeling will pervade the area, and the spirit will begin wailing to herald the coming of a tragedy. However, the doom she precedes is not necessarily what will come with certainty, as various rituals and acts seem to be able to deter that of which she warns. For example, it seems that if one can determine the tragedy that is to occur, they can sometimes offer the Klagefrau an alternative which may influence what is to come, as long as they do so immediately upon her appearance. If the Klagefrau appears in front of a house in which an occupant is gravely ill, the family of the sick should throw the sick person's clothes outside in front of the house. If the spirit leaves the clothes, then it is said that their owner will recover. If the clothes are taken, however, the dying one is soon to die. As with the banshee, the Klagefrau is not necessarily a harmful spirit herself, and while these rituals may deter hardships, it is not clear how much influence she herself has over them. Rather, as unnerving as her presence may be, it seems that she almost always serves as simply a premonitory messenger who vanishes after her message is delivered. Before we turn to the final subject of our presentation, we must warn our audience of its especially unsettling nature. Indeed, we have never spoken of such a gruesome and horrifying entity in the entire history of this series, and likely, we never will again. And so we advise that the faint of heart turn off before we discuss the creature known as the Volpatinga. In all seriousness, the Volpatinga is a mysterious animal said to dwell primarily in the forests of Bavaria. There is not a universally agreed upon specific description of a Volpatinga. However, it is generally held to be a kind of chimera-like creature, or an animal made up of a combination of different animals. The most common is that of a creature with the head of a rabbit, the body of a squirrel, the wings of a pheasant, the antlers of a deer, and fangs, though various other combinations, incorporating different animals native to the area, are found in the mythology as well, which are also referred to as Volpertingers. Volpertinger is only the Bavarian name for the creature. Equivalents are found throughout the German-speaking world and even beyond. In Austria, the creature is known as a Rauhrockel, and in Thuringia, a Rasselbock. In spite of its intimidating appearance, the Volpertinger is not actually a threat to humans. It is, rather, an odd, elusive, and magical creature. The Volpertinger is most likely to be found in the forests at night under the full moon. Legends tell of hunters who have captured them, but this is very difficult to do. Some say that those with the best odds of catching them are beautiful women, as the animals are enamored of female beauty. While the Volpatinga was widely regarded as a fictional creature, the notion of the existence of what was called the Lapis cornutus, or the horned hare, was taken seriously by naturalists of the early modern era. Fascinatingly, in spite of its fantastical nature, of all the creatures mentioned in this episode, the Volpatinga may have the most basis in reality. There are no hares or rabbits with naturally occurring horns. However, there is a disease called Shope papillomavirus, which causes the growth of cancerous tumors on these animals that can, somewhat, resemble antlers or horns in some cases. It's possible, though not certain, that this disease may have spawned the legend and been the source of some of the reports of sightings and even claims of capturing and possessing living horned hares, although it likely does not explain everything. It is certain that pure myth and taxidermic fabrications embellished the legend once it had begun, regardless of its origins, especially because, again, horned hares or rabbits are only one form in which the Volpatingers are described, although it is the most common. Similar to the Volpatinga is the Alvetrich of Western Germany. The Alvetrich is said to resemble something like a chicken with antlers and scales instead of feathers. Alvetrichen are said to be a bizarre cross between a fowl and either a goblin or an elf, which hatch from eggs laid throughout the forest. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, we invite you to come check out the rest of Fire of Learning, especially our other campfire videos, and to subscribe to keep up with more videos like this in the future. To support the channel further, there is a link to our Patreon in the description. A special thanks to our current supporters, once again listed here. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next time around the campfire.